Welcome, everyone, to the inaugural episode of Advancing Your Skills. This is the next level of training provided by DSD for case managers, care coordinators, and the like. Today's episode is going to concentrate on family and friends paid to provide traditional waiver services. My name is Lauren Harrington. I am the case management training specialist with DSD. And I'm so excited to see the numbers climbing as I'm talking. Really nice to see all of you here. So let's get into it. So today we are joining the meeting, and you've obviously gotten connected via WebEx if you are hearing my voice and seeing my face. But if you do have any issues with your audio or any of your connections with WebEx, one of the greatest things that you can do is use the call me option on WebEx, and the instructions to do that are on the slide. You guys are all on mute, and you will be muted for the duration of our presentation today. If you have questions, we will have time for those. There is a Q&A box at the bottom bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Looks a little like that when you have all of your panels open, and you can type your questions into the Q&A panel. Make sure that your ask is set to all panelists, and that will let all of the folks behind the scenes be able to see your question. Unfortunately, there is no way to have the Q&A open to everyone. We would have to open the chat box for that. But we want to make sure that all of our folks behind the scenes, the subject matter experts, can see your question and start researching it as soon as possible. So make sure that you have the Q&A set to all panelists. On our agenda today, we have one little announcement, and then we will get right into our presentation. So our first announcement of our inaugural episode, you've probably all seen the e-lists come out and seen emails going back and forth between DSD and your lead agencies. And we actually have a new employment training requirement. We are offering a new course called Getting to Work, a Case Manager's Guide to Support People in Building and Fulfilling Their Vision. This is required for all disability waiver case managers, and you need to complete the training by August 1st, 2024. Any case managers who are hired after August 1st will be expected to complete it within 6 months of their hire date. So there are a few additional registration dates coming up. The course is currently open for registrations for the next course available dates. So go ahead and click the link in your PowerPoint, not the one that I'm sharing because you won't be able to click the link, but you can get this PowerPoint in the training archive page, DSD training archive page. And if you click the link on that PowerPoint, you will get to the instructions on how to register and how to take this course. Again, this is only required for disability waiver case managers at this time. And it is required to be taken by August 1st, 2024. This does count as a part of your 20 hours of required annual training. So make sure that you are documenting this as a part of that as well. So let's get into our presentation today. Family and friends paid to provide traditional waiver services. I'm going to have the folks who are with me behind the scenes do a little introduction of themselves. So who is present from DHS? Again, my name is Lauren Harrington. I am a now middle-aged white woman wearing a white sweatshirt with a hood, and my hair is blonde and pulled halfway back so that it doesn't get in my face while I'm presenting. So I will have the folks who are with me come off mute and introduce themselves. We'll start with Andrew.
Hello, yes, my name is Andrew Johnson. I'm the Support Planning and Informed Choice Team Lead here at the Disability Services Division. Thank you for having me.
And Sarah?
Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Sarah Beauchesne. I am the Informed Choice policy specialist on the support planning and informed choice team.
And Victoria?
Hi, everybody. I'm Victoria. I'm the support planning policy specialist. I'm female, mid 40s, and white, wearing a black sweater with a cabin-like atmosphere in the background, trying to stay warm on this cold day. So welcome, everybody.
Thanks, Victoria. And Liz?
Hi, I'm Liz Sisk. I am the Case Management and Support Plan Policy Specialist in the Aging Adult Services Division. I am a 40-year-old white woman with long brown hair, and I have a treadmill in my background.
Awesome. I'm sure it gets lots of use, Liz. It's not just in the background. Excellent. Well, welcome all of my subject matter experts. We will be referring to those folks as we get questions coming in, again, through that Q&A panel. All right, so let's get into our presentation today. Here are our learning objectives for today. So with this training, you will be able to identify who is allowed to be paid to provide traditional waiver services. We'll also hope that you'll be able to list traditional waiver services that can and cannot be provided by a paid family member or friend, and describe ways in which a case manager or care coordinator can approach this topic strategically in their support planning conversations. And last but certainly not least, illustrate the benefits and the risks of having a friend or family member provide traditional waiver services. Again, we're going to refer, just like we did in building your skills, to the person. And that is really just to talk about the person receiving services. We definitely know that people make decisions by themselves, but also with support from their families or friends or legal representatives. But we're going to be just talking about the person in this case. So we do have some recommended training for you. So before we dive into today's topic, we recommend that you have taken or will take the following courses that are on this slide to enhance your learning experience. It's not mandatory to have taken these classes before attending this class, but having some familiarity with these topics and the skills that we presented in these topics can help you to grasp the training content more effectively that we're going to build on here in advancing your skills. So we don't want to exclude anyone from participating today, but these courses are intended to provide those foundational level topics and foundational level skills that we are going to be focusing on and building on and advancing your skills. All of these trainings can be found in the DSD training archive and will soon be available on TrainLink via self-paced online interactive modules. So we are still working on that. But at this point, you can find all of these topics, again, in the DSD training archive. We also have a link to that. I always like to tell people that I always find it by going to or just Googling DSD training archive. It's the first link that pops up. All right, so why are we talking about this today? Well, we've heard a lot from case managers, care coordinators, service providers, and the like, that there are current conversations happening and concerns happening about staffing. Finding alternative options to traditional service providers is really a hot topic right now. And having a person's friend or family member provide those traditional waiver services can really be a great option. So we really want to take a look. This is a complex topic. It requires an advanced knowledge of support planning and an advanced knowledge of the person and the person's needs, as well as an advanced knowledge of the waiver services themselves. So what we hope is that when we present this, if you can understand this option a little bit better, it can help you as a case manager or a care coordinator to provide informed choice to people and to clearly explain the intricacies of having someone in their life provide these services to the people that we work with. So today, our Advancing Your Skills session is going to focus on family members or friends providing traditional waiver services under traditional waivers. The information that we're going to talk about today does not apply to CDCS and does not apply to upcoming CFSS. So if you have questions about paying family or friends on CDCS or CFSS, take a look at episode 8 of the Building Your Skills series, which covered CDCS. Again, you can find that in the DSD training archive. So let's start off with a big picture view. So to understand when someone can provide traditional paid support to another person, we need to be able to identify a few things. The first is the person's assessed needs. The person does need to have a documented need that requires support. If you need more information about determining and identifying assessed needs, Building Your Skills Episode 3, Building a Foundation, is a great place to start. We also need to identify the relationship between the person receiving services and the caregiver or potential caregiver. Then we need to examine our service requirements. Does that potential caregiver meet the requirements to provide that service? And last but certainly not least, informed choice. Has that person made an informed choice? And do they understand the benefits and the risks of having a family member or friend provide services to the best of their ability? We're going to talk more about informed choice a bit later in our presentation. But again, we do have Building Your Skills episodes that are specific to informed choice and the informed decision-making process. So let's get started. We're going to kick off today talking about who can and cannot be paid to provide services. Before having that in-depth conversation about services, the case manager and care coordinator has to review the person's assessment, has to identify the person's assessed needs, and ask some really clarifying questions about each one of those identified needs. Those conversations are intended to really set the stage for the person to be making decisions about the support types that could address their needs, and if a traditional waiver service is the preferred option. The case manager should also be asking clarifying questions about the family member or friend that the person wishes to have deliver the service and their relationship to the person. So first, who can and cannot? Well, friends or neighbors can always provide traditional waiver services so long as they meet those waiver service requirements. Again, that's for friends or neighbors. Legally responsible individuals, and we're talking about professionals here. A professional, legally responsible individual can never provide traditional waiver services. And that would be someone like a professional guardian or a professional conservator. In this case, when we're talking about a professional, this is an individual, an agency, an organization, or business entity that provides guardianship or conservatorship services for a fee. And really the key here is they're paid to provide these services. So let's talk about relatives. Relatives can sometimes provide traditional services under certain conditions. Now, we define relative as a person related by blood, marriage, or adoption, including a spouse, the parent of an adult, a child, a sibling, a niece or nephew, a grandparent, or an aunt or uncle. We do also have a link on the slides to the CBSM page that we're going to be referencing quite a bit during this presentation, which is paying relatives and legally responsible individuals. So sometimes relatives can provide traditional services. Also, non-professional, legally responsible individuals can sometimes provide traditional services under certain conditions. So who are we talking about in this case? Legally responsible non-professionals can include guardians or conservators. Again, these are non-professionals, so they're not being paid for their services. The definition of legally responsible individuals does exclude spouses and parents of adults that are not legally responsible individuals unless they are court ordered as a legal guardian or conservator. So for an example here, a parent of an adult with disabilities who lives on their own. If they are a guardian for that person and they're not paid, they could be paid to provide waiver services in some situations. The distinguishing factor there is that they can't be paid guardians or conservators. Also, under Minnesota law, a professional guardian means a person acting as a guardian for 3 or more people who are not related to the guardian by blood, adoption, or marriage. What about the spouse or parent of a minor child? A person's spouse or parent, when the person is a minor, can never provide traditional waiver services, even though the parent of a minor child is considered a legally responsible individual. If this is something that you want to consider for the person, CDCS or CFSS are service options that may be considered when the person wants to pay their spouse or when the parent wants to be paid to provide support to their minor child. We are talking about traditional waiver services under traditional waivers. So when I say under certain conditions, sometimes, what does that really mean? For relationships that can sometimes be paid to provide waiver services, case managers and care coordinators must ensure that all conditions are met prior to authorizing the service. So the case manager or care coordinator needs to be sure to confirm the relationship of the caregiver to the person. They also need to understand the service and the scope of supports that would be provided by that potential caregiver. They also need to make a referral to the providing agency or organization that the person's chosen to work with and advise the provider that the person has a relative or friend that they'd like to work with to provide that service. So conditions of payment for all waiver services, relatives, non-professional legal guardians and conservators of adults may be paid to provide waiver services if they meet the following conditions. And we've talked about quite a few of these. Number one, that they're related by blood, marriage, or adoption, or if they're not related by blood, marriage, or adoption, that they're the guardian or conservator for only one participant or more than one participant if they are siblings. The person can also not be responsible otherwise to provide that care or service, and they need to be qualified to provide that service. Number five, they cannot be enrolled as having a little trouble talking today. They cannot be enrolled as a medical assistance provider or MA provider with Minnesota healthcare programs for the service that they're providing. They also cannot be a controlling entity of an enrolled MA provider where the guardian or conservator would gain financially. So regarding number five, the potential caregiver can't provide a service if they're enrolled as an MA provider. They need to be employed by a qualified provider. And regarding number six, the case manager or care coordinator should ask the person whether the potential caregiver has a financial interest in the provider organization. If the case manager or care coordinator becomes aware of an authorization that already exists where this is happening, please document this and forward it to the DSD contact form to be addressed. So again, this is all excluding CDCS and CFSS. This is traditional waiver services provided under the traditional waivers. So far we've talked about identifying the person's assessed needs, and we've talked about the relationship between the caregiver and the person being served. It's especially important to ensure that you have a full understanding of how the person is related to the potential caregiver, because certain people are ineligible to be paid to provide waiver services. Next, we're going to explore service requirements and informed choice. So let's talk a little bit about what services can and cannot be provided. So once the case manager and care coordinator has identified the person's assessed needs and determined the relationship between the person being served and their potential caregiver, they have to understand which services are allowed to be provided by a related caregiver. This will hopefully lead to a further conversation about the requirements that a caregiver must meet to provide a particular service. So let's explore what services can and cannot be paid or provided by a paid family member. So all services on the disability waivers, and when we talk about disability waivers, we're talking about CAC, CADI, BI, and DD, and EW, AC, and ECS can be provided by friends or neighbors, and most services can be provided by relatives or non-professional responsible individuals. Take a look at the CBSM page for the specific service that you're trying to have authorized to verify the provider qualification requirements and to confirm the caregiver's relationship to the person prior to authorizing the service. So you'll see here we've got a link to our support planning webpage as well. So case managers and care coordinators, you have a variety of responsibilities that includes ensuring that services are authorized according to service requirements. So those service requirements include things like eligibility criteria, covered and non-covered service components, provider qualifications, lead agency responsibilities, authorization and billing information, and other important information based on the service. In this role, you need to understand the services and their unique service requirements to ensure that all services are authorized in an allowable way, and so that you can help people understand the options that are available to them. You can learn about the available services and their requirements in the CVSM page. If you take a look, we've got a link here on this slide to the waiver AC service provider overview. And it talks a little bit about those service requirements. We're going to take a look at an example next. So here's an example of a service that a person might wish to have a friend or family member hired to provide, individualized home supports, or IHS. Individualized home supports has really complex service requirements. And when you present this option to people, you need to know things like whether the person that they want to be their caregiver is eligible. Pardon me. You'll also need to know if the person receiving services is eligible to receive IHS. You'll need to know things like what the covered services are and what the non-covered services are, and how the covered services will address their needs and other requirements. So when you navigate to the CVSM IHS page, you'll find a variety of unique service requirements. And that includes, but it isn't limited to, of course, limitations, secondary information, remote support delivery options, if applicable, the service amount, provider standards and qualifications, and a lot more. So understanding service requirements is not only necessary to determining whether a service may be authorized, but it can help your discussion with the person to determine whether their friend or family should provide that service for them. So when you've determined that a service may be authorized, a review of provider standards may help you explore whether their friend or their family member should be hired. So things like licensing requirements, things like the exclusion here from 245D licensure, and things like reporting for controlled procedures, things like emergency use of manual restraint and prohibited procedures. Background studies, those can be required depending on the service as well. If the person doesn't feel like their family member will meet those provider requirements, they may wish to explore other options. We also want to bring up that care coordinators and case managers are not provider enrollment. They're not responsible for provider licensing, but you guys do need to understand provider standards. So when you take the time to understand the provider standards, it will help you to ensure that services are being delivered according to requirements, and to understand and describe what the person can expect from their services. It may also help the person to determine whether their friend or family may provide that service. So, services that cannot be provided. The disability waivers do have a few exceptions. These services can't be provided by a relative or legally responsible individual. So, caregiver living expenses. This requires an unrelated caregiver to reside in their home. So, again, if they're a relative or a legally responsible individual, they don't meet that requirement. Individualized home supports with family training. This service design requires support and training for family members, so they can't train themselves, basically. I apologize for the cough. I've been fighting a cold for quite a while. There are also some services that can never be used to pay a primary caregiver. So all of the disability waivers, AC and ECS, indicate that the primary caregiver cannot be paid through the following services: chore services, homemaker services, and respite. The reason for this and the definition for primary caregiver differs depending on the service. So take a look at the CVSM pages that are linked here. But basically, relatives, legally responsible individuals, and non-professional guardians and conservators who are also the primary caregiver cannot be paid to provide these services when those services are intended to provide relief or support for themselves as the primary caregiver. So they can't be paid to relieve themselves of these responsibilities. Case management, care coordination, or case aid services cannot be provided by an individual or agency that has a financial interest in the services provided to the person. Also, relatives cannot be paid to provide case management services either. So back to our big picture. So far, we've discussed the person's assessed needs, the relationship between the person and their potential caregiver, and the service requirements. Big thing to take away here, remember, it's really important to review the CBSM page for the service being considered to ensure that the potential caregiver meets the requirements to provide that service. This is going to differ depending on the service and the person's waiver choice. I'm going to take a pause at this moment to see if we do have any questions that have come in through the Q&A panel. Again, if you do have a question, Q&A panel is located at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. So I'm going to pause and see if any of my subject matter experts behind the scenes have any questions that we can answer at this point.
Oh, Lauren, this is Andrew Johnson. We received a number of questions asking whether or not a power of attorney is considered a professional. And, you know, regardless of the title of the legal representative, you know, guardian, conservator, power of attorney, etc., you may need to consider asking the person some questions to understand their role. We'd suggest asking them whether or not they're paid to provide services as a legal representative. You might also ask them whether or not they're providing the service as an entity, a business entity. And you might also ask whether or not they provide those services to more than one person. And if you have additional questions about this or concerns, please reach out to us through the DSD contact form. A link will be provided at the end of this presentation. And that is what we have for now. Thank you, Lauren.
Excellent. Thanks, Andrew. Again, if you guys are coming up with questions, please don't hesitate to ask them. And we will be able to return back to our subject matter expert panel, we like that, to see if they can get those answers for you. Again, Q&A panel, bottom right-hand corner of your screen. All right. So we've spent a lot of time today talking about what can and cannot be done. Well, let's talk a little bit about the benefits of having friends or family members provide traditional waiver services. Minnesota recognizes that family and friends have a really important role in a person's life. Often those family members or friends are in the best position to support that person. They know the person, they know that person's needs, and the person might be more comfortable working with someone who they already know, who knows them well. So some other benefits might include things like they may provide a way to support that person's primary language and their cultural needs. They also may support a person's choice to remain living in their own home. Having a friend or family member provide traditional waiver services could prevent early or unnecessary institutionalization. And many Minnesotans, we find, are turning to family and friends in situations where maybe they live in a region where services are not readily available, or in an area where provider staffing is low. So there can be a role for paid family and friends within that person's waiver services. When talking about those caregiving options, friends or family may be more willing to provide care if they're paid, which ultimately could grow that person's support network. Also, the decision to work with a provider to hire family and friends to provide traditional waiver services can increase a person's ability to self-direct without having all the employer responsibilities that come along with consumer-directed community services, or CDCS. So it's a way to kind of dip that toe into that self-direction. So what do we need to take into consideration when having these conversations with people that are receiving waiver services? We've talked about a lot of intricacies when exploring this option for people. So what else should be taken into account? Let's talk a little bit about those strategic conversations and support planning. People in Minnesota receiving waiver services have the right to an informed choice. People have the right to make decisions about their services and their supports. Case managers and care coordinators must provide complete and accurate information about all available options, including options to have friends and family provide paid support. If people have assessed needs, which can be addressed by a service in which family and friends could be paid, that option needs to be made available to the person during support planning conversations. For this especially, we would encourage you to review our Building Your Skills series, especially around having support planning conversations. Also around support types, episodes 3, 6, and 8 in particular of Building Your Skills talks about some of those really important basic foundational topics. So some things to consider when providing informed choices for these services. Case managers and care coordinators must provide information about these services that is accessible and understandable to the person receiving services. We want to ensure that people understand all of their options. This applies to all types of information, verbal, written, all of that needs to be provided in a way that the person can understand. They also need to provide information about the benefits and the risks of having friends and family support them. So describe how being supported by a family member or friend could benefit them and what potential challenges it may bring, given that person's specific situation. That person needs to take that information and use it to make a choice based on their needs and their preferences. Case managers should encourage the person to consider if having a friend or family member provide paid services would impact the relationship with that person. Ultimately, it's up to their person and their legal representative and their family and whoever they make decisions with to make that decision on whether that arrangement could work. Having a paid caregiver that's a friend, neighbor, or relative may not be for everyone. There are many reasons why this type of support might not work out. Things like change of mind. The person maybe changes their mind, their caregiver maybe changes their mind on whether they want to end the service or change who's providing that service as well. So think about that, bring that up at these very basic support planning conversations. The person might also have a change in need. So their needs may have changed and the person who was originally hired to support them is no longer able to meet that person's level of need. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Caregiver fatigue. This is a really big issue. So the people that the person identifies as potential supports may be already experiencing caregiver fatigue and don't have the capacity to take on that responsibility to become a paid caregiver as well. Also, they may choose to be paid to provide that service for that person and then experience caregiver fatigue and may no longer be able to support that person in the way that they need. So things to think about. Neglect or abuse. The people that the person identified as potential supports could have a history of abuse or neglect toward others and maybe not safe to provide care for that person. Another thing to think about, housing or living arrangements. If the person's housing or living arrangement is dependent on someone they wish to be their paid caregiver, there are risks to the stability of that person's housing. This is really something to consider when thinking about hiring friends, neighbors, or relatives to provide paid waiver services. A big one to consider, their relationship with that potential caregiver. So think about things like, how would this feel to me if I were a person with disabilities to know that my friend is being paid to spend time with me and provide a service? How would that feel if their friend or family member turns out to not be reliable? Will they still be friends if they need to fire that caregiver? Is it worth the risk? Making that decision to have a family member or a friend provide traditional waiver services will change a relationship positively or negatively. And the case manager and care coordinator should have those conversations about the short-term and long-term impacts to the person's relationships. It's a big deal. Case managers and care coordinators, you have the tools and skills to prevent or to help this person prepare for when those things occur. And let's talk a little bit about those things. So case managers and care coordinators play a critical role in supporting people to make an informed choice about their services and their support options. That includes informing people of their options should their first choice become unavailable. So one of the prevention tools that you have as a case manager or care coordinator is backup planning. And anything that we talk about regarding backup planning can be found in the CBSM resource, which is the Guide for Emergency Backup Planning. We've got the link in here as well. So having friends and family members paid to provide waiver services might be the person's first choice, but if that proposed caregiver doesn't meet qualifications or becomes unable to provide that service, having a backup plan in place will help the person think through other options. In a similar vein, a caregiver could be part of a backup plan if traditional waiver service providers are unavailable or unable to support the person receiving services. So thinking about backup planning for a paid family member, if that doesn't work out, or having a backup plan using a paid family member or friend to provide services if traditional waiver service providers aren't available. So they can be, flexed in a variety of ways. So some topics to think about. When considering family members and paid friends as paid caregivers, think about things like short-term staffing need. What if they're late? What if they don't show up? Who's that person going to call? Think about long-term staffing needs. What if it doesn't work out at all? We thought this was a really great idea, but it doesn't work. So also thinking about other support options. What if that paid caregiver is not available? Who would that person call? So maybe they would call other family members, other friends, organizations. There are other providers, maybe use assistive technology. Formal or an informal caregiver also is an option. Thinking about things like that up front as part of their backup plan can be really helpful. Remember, paid family members or friends could be one option to back up formal service providers when things don't go as planned. Advanced backup planning will help the person to make an informed decision about the services and supports available to them. So these are really important topics to consider. One of the other prevention tools that you guys have in your back pocket, so to speak, is monitoring. The case manager or care coordinator should be having conversations during the plan year to ensure that the level of services being provided supports the person's daily needs and activities. Case managers and care coordinators, you're responsible to ensure providers deliver services as written in the person's plan. The person's support plan must be followed even if services are being provided by a friend or family member. The person may be reluctant to report that their needs aren't being met if their caregiver is someone they have a relationship with. Other than asking the person directly, consider other ways to check in to make sure that the support plan is being followed. We also want case managers and care coordinators to continually evaluate whether the support plan meets that person's needs and also update that support plan as needed. Have conversations about whether the decision to hire their friend or family member is working out. Again, are their needs being met? Is the relationship with their caregiver being negatively impacted? Is it still the best option for the person and their needs? Remember that the person can change their mind about their caregiver or their services at any time. If you have more questions about monitoring, take a look at Building Your Skills, episode 15, Monitoring the Support Plan. So we've discussed talking about the person's identified needs. We've talked about the relationship between the potential caregiver and the person being served, and we've talked about service requirements. This last section was really talking about informed choice and the fact that there certainly are benefits to having a friend or family member provide traditional waiver services, but there are risks as well. It's the responsibility of the case manager or care coordinator to ensure that they're having robust support planning conversations with the person receiving services to help that person make an informed choice when presented with all of the information. If a person's unsure about having a friend or family member paid to provide services for them, it may be appropriate to suggest incorporating that option into a backup plan in the case that their first choices don't work out. And remember, they can change their mind at any time. If the person or their caregiver is no longer on board, the case manager or care coordinator must support them to find another support option to meet that assessed need. Pardon me. So let's talk about some myths. Bust them. So here's some misconceptions regarding paid family caregivers. There's no support for paid family caregivers, is the myth. Well, here are the facts. Family caregivers can be at higher risk of burnout or depression if they're not supported, but there are resources to help caregivers that include things like caregiver classes, like those that are available on the Direct Course Connect website. There are also other resources on the Minnesota Disability Hub and on the Minnesota Board of Aging website. We've got those linked here for you as well. Another misconception, relatives must undergo burdensome licensing, enrollment, and enrollment applications. Well, the fact is, in some cases, relatives may be exempt from certain DHS licensure and MHCP enrollment requirements for specific services. We know case managers and care coordinators are not licensing or provider enrollment experts, but it is your role to link the person or family member to support options that might assist in becoming a provider, like provider licensing. If you have questions, a great place to go would be your supervisor or your team for more information. Another misconception, if people weren't offered the option to have a family member or friend provide services previously, well, it means it's not available to them now. The fact is, case managers and care coordinators must ensure that all people are aware of this option. People can choose this option when it is available and if their family member or friend is willing and qualified to provide that service that supports the person's assessed need. The person can make this choice at any time, included if they weren't previously offered this option. Another misconception, people can pay their family and friends to spend time with them. Well, the fact is, family and friends can be paid to provide traditional waiver services to address and assess need, so long as they are qualified to provide that service and hired by an agency. So we can't just pay people to spend time with the folks receiving services. There needs to be a service that addressed and assessed need, and the person providing those services needs to be qualified. And our last misconception, family and friends are the best choice to provide traditional waiver services for all people and all services since they're more reliable. Well, the fact is, case managers and care coordinators are responsible to discuss this choice with the person so that the person can determine whether this is the best decision for them. It is ultimately a personal decision, but the benefits and the risks should be weighed for each individual. When exploring the options to best support a person receiving waiver services, having a friend or family member paid to provide those traditional waiver services might be a viable option, but there are many elements to take into consideration. Things like the person's assessed needs, their relationship to the proposed caregiver, specific service requirements, and their own informed choice might be the deciding factor as to the best option for that person. It is the person's choice. So today we talked about who can be allowed to provide traditional waiver services. We also talked about the waiver services that can and can't be provided by a paid family member or friend. And we talked about how a case manager or care coordinator can approach this topic strategically in their support planning conversations. Hopefully, we also illustrated some benefits and risks of having a friend or family member provide those waiver services as well. With current conversations and concerns about the staffing shortage, finding alternative options to traditional service providers has been a really hot topic, and having a person's family member or friend provide those traditional waiver services can be a great option. Understanding this option more fully can help you as a case manager or care coordinator providing informed choice to people, and to clearly explain the intricacies to the people that you serve. I'm going to pause because this is our last option for Q&A. So if you have questions, please don't hesitate to type those in to the Q&A panel at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. I'm going to pause and let my subject matter expert panel, which I think is maybe your new names as a group, take a look and see if we can answer some of those questions.
Hi, Lauren. This is Liz Sisk. We received a question that says if a power of attorney is not a paid person, they would not be able to be an EW homemaker for that person. So What's important about this is to understand if they are the primary caregiver. If the power of attorney is the primary caregiver, then they cannot provide homemaking services when homemaking is intended to provide relief or support for themselves.
I'm sure you guys are all reading through questions. So we'll just pause for a moment to see if any of those questions that are coming in can be answered. And while my panel works behind the scenes to avoid us having a long period of silence, we'll come back to the Q&A. But let's just kind of go through a couple of more things. So we want you to know that these are going to happen on a regular basis, these advancing your skills presentations. We will send more details about the topics that are upcoming in our e-list announcements as we get a little bit closer to our webinar dates. Unlike building your skills, which we tried to have monthly, these presentations are going to be happening quarterly. We want you to register for our future Advancing Your Skills presentations on TrainLink. So today was obviously episode 1. March 27th is today's date. And of course, it's 2024 and not 2023. There's a typo. But our dates upcoming for 2024, June 26th, September 25th, and December 18th. All 3 are available to be registered for in TrainLink if you click the register link. If you don't have that register link and you just get into TrainLink, if you search Advancing Your Skills, you'll be able to register for all 3 of those presentations. So we want to just take a moment and say thank you to each one of you, regardless of your role. You all play such an important role as you help the people you support make informed decisions while building their support plan. All of the roles that you play are really indispensable as you empower the individuals you support to make those informed decisions. You have unwavering commitment, ensuring that people have opportunity to live the life that they envision. We genuinely appreciate your dedication and the meaningful impact that you make on a daily basis. So thank you again for all of your hard work. And I like the picture full of snow. I think it's pretty appropriate for today. I'm going to pause before we move into our resources and see if our panel can come back and answer any of those questions that have come in through the Q&A.
Hello, this is Andrew Johnson. We received a question asking if case managers and care coordinators should be recommending family members enroll as a provider with DHS versus getting hired by an agency that is already licensed to provide the service. And in that situation, or in response to that, I would just circle back to the role of the case manager and care coordinator, in that they must ensure each person can make an informed choice that includes presenting all available options, and hiring friends or family is an option people may consider. And your role is to really help them obtain information, understand the decision to be made. As was shared in the presentation, there are considerations when hiring a family or friend to perform a service, particularly with respect to their relationship. And so it might not be something that everyone chooses to do. So it really is on a person by person basis. And that's what we have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. These are really advanced questions, and we are expecting that with the level of training that we're providing, that we are getting advanced questions. One of the things that we will be doing is researching these questions on the back end while this presentation is happening. So if we don't have our answers right away, we may not be able to answer your questions live. We will have an opportunity to get those questions answered if you do not get your questions answered today, and I'll go through how to do that. There are some questions here about advancing your skills trainings, and those I can actually answer. So the next 3 advancing your skills sections, are they repeats of this particular presentation, or are they all going to be different? They're going to be different topics, and we will send out an e-list for each topic as it gets a little bit closer to the date. So they will all be different. So when we go back to the register slide, the June, September, and December dates will not be repeats of this presentation. They will be different topics. And they will also be topics that build on knowledge that we received in building your skills and kind of taking it to the next level. Also, there's a question about, will these advancing your skills trainings also work for the case manager training requirements? And yes, they will. We know that the case manager training requirements have recently changed to be 20 hours a year. And this does count as a part of that 20 hours. Depending on the topic, you're going to want to document that in whatever way your lead agency is documenting your required training hours. And it could potentially count as one of those topics, but it definitely counts as overall part of your 20 hours. So definitely great question. Make sure that you know the ways in which your lead agency is documenting your required training. All right, so getting into some of the additional slides we've got here for you, we have a section in our presentations each month where we point out the resources that we use to gather information. So the first one here, we talked about this quite a bit, the DSD Training Archive. This is an archive of all DSD training handouts. If you're looking in particular for the Building Your Skills prerequisite courses, you're going to want to page down a little bit to the Building Your Skills section, and all of those will be posted there. This training PowerPoint will be also available on the training archive. Usually they're up before the end of the week. So you should be able to go in and get this PowerPoint as well as the recording for anyone who missed today's session. We've also got CBSM pages linked for paying relatives and legally responsible individuals. We've got the support planning page, the waiver AC service provider overview. We also referenced the CBSM page for individualized home supports. We also referenced chore services, homemakers, and respite. And the resource, which is really wonderful, the Guide for Emergency Backup Planning. We also linked out to Direct Course Connect. If you're not familiar with this, this is a website that contains content and courses from the College of Direct Support. This is really a series of online training courses and curricula that's focused on inclusion and community support. So as providers, a lot of them know about this and use it. As case managers and care coordinators, you may not be so familiar, but take a look at the information that's available out on that resource. The Disability Hub MN and the Minnesota Board on Aging are some other great resources that can help you to serve the people that you work with. You are going to be asked after today's session to take a survey, and we really do ask that you take some time to let us know your thoughts about this new format and this new presentation. It will pop up automatically as you close out of WebEx, and it'll show a little warning that says you're going to be directed to an external site. Go ahead and click continue. We're not trying to spam you. We're just trying to have you take our survey. So you'll be directed once you close WebEx. So please do take a few minutes after this and fill that survey out so that we can hear your thoughts about this new format and this topic. If your question was not able to be answered today, which we know you're asking very advanced level questions that require research, send your questions to us. We still want to be able to help you out. The disability waiver services questions, you can send that to the DSD contact form, which we've got a link on the PowerPoint. And if they're in regards to care coordination, the elderly waiver, or alternative care, you can email those directly to the Aging and Adult Services at their email address on this slide. dhs.aasd.hcbs@state.mn.us. All right. Just taking a look through our questions. I'm going to pause for a moment to see if the panel has any more additional questions to answer. But I do see that there is one that says, do EW case managers take the case manager course? I'm going to assume you're talking about the employment course that we announced at the beginning of this presentation. And if that's the case, no, that is only required for disability waiver case managers. So CAC, CADI, BI, and DD. We will at some point hopefully have that available to everyone to have you take it. But at this point, that is all that is required. If you have any questions about training requirements in general, you can feel free to send those over through the DSD contact form or the Aging and Adult Services email as well. If you need the audio version of this webinar, the video version of this webinar, you can take a look at our training archive page, and that will have today's webinar recording as well as the PowerPoint. And additionally, you can email us or fill out that DSD contact form with any questions that you might have. And I will pause to see if my panel behind the scenes has any questions that they were able to research in the meantime. All right, looks like.
Hey there.
Oh.
This is Andrew Johnson. I just wanted to say thank you, folks. You've submitted a lot of really nice questions, and some of them are very complex, as Lauren highlighted earlier. So we won't be able to get to all of them. If you need individualized consultation, as Lauren shared, please use the DSD contact form. And I also just want to note or remind folks that the requirements that we shared today are largely based on federal requirements, and it's our sphere of influence on those requirements is not specifically in the state's control here, so or in our policy area's control. Thank you.
So keep those questions coming. If you don't have the contact information, again, DSD contact form, DHS 8168, or you can email Aging and Adult Services directly at their email address listed on this slide. Again, we want to thank you all so much for taking the time out of your schedules to join us today for this presentation. We hope you take the time to fill out our survey and let us know what you think. We will be returning in June with a new topic, so keep an eye out on your e-list announcements for what that topic will be. We will hope to have that out to you very shortly. And we hope to see you again next quarter. And hopefully the weather will be a little more hospitable at the end of June. So thanks again for all of you joining us here today. We will go ahead and stop our presentation. Hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday.